Chris and Kurt had this sort of chemistry going where they just complemented each other very well. It just seemed like a very strong, if young band. And something about Kurt's voice really appealed to me. I thought he had a very good rock scream, kind of a raw, throaty sort of. It was a very enjoyable session. I just liked it. I thought it was good. I thought they had some good riffs, you know, some good rock songs. Kurt would come up with the song, and Chris would come up with the bass line that would sort of get that sound, that very distinct, big, simple, to the point, no beating around the bush bass line that he would come up with.
Things will be alright. Things will be okay. Every night.
Well, I think that Bleach, for the most part, is very much an album about Kurt's circumstances at the time. You know, he's writing a lot of songs on that record that he'd been working on for several years, so they're kind of his early sketchings. In my opinion, there are a lot of songs on that record that aren't as successful lyrically, because I think Kurt was so indebted to some of these lyrics that he'd crafted that he didn't feel like changing them a lot, you know.
About a Girl was kind of the odd song, because it's sort of the melodic pop tune, if you will, and it sort of stuck out. And Kurt said, you know, I don't know if people will be ready for this song, but I really want to do one pop song on this record. So, and I said, hey, you know, I'm just the engineer here, you know, whatever, I'll make it sound good, you go ahead.
Again, for me, About a Girl, which is such a simple song, it's essentially about his girlfriend at the time, and he said, according to some of the friends that I interviewed of his, that he had listened to the Beatles all day prior to writing that song. And I think it very much sounds like a Beatles song in terms of melody to me, but the idea that he could write such a simple song, you know, I Can See You Anytime for Free, you know, I mean, it's a beautiful melody idea. I think with that song, that was somewhat of a breakthrough for Kurt because it was simplicity. Prior to that, I think he was trying to write almost too complicated punk and rock songs.
They were able to afford one reel of half-inch tape, which was 8-track tape. It was about 33 minutes worth. And they basically just filled up the tape with songs, which wound up being about 9.5 songs. And then once the tape had run out, they said, okay, that's it. Let's do the vocals now. So then they went back over the tape and he sang all the vocals in one take. And then we mixed it. And I said, well, do you mind if I give your tape to some people? Because I thought it was really good. And I thought some friends of mine would really enjoy hearing this. So, you know, they said, oh, fine, because we're just going to give cassettes out to people too. We need to, you know, we want people to know about us. So I gave some tapes to people, and one of them got to John Poneman at Sub Pop. There's a reason why it doesn't say produced by Jack and Dino on the record. Because really, I just engineered it. I mean, it was sort of produced by everybody. Or perhaps produced by nobody. You know, it's really almost a live document of what they were doing at the time.
I think Endino was very important to creating that sound, and partially because of the fact that he just got out of the way. You know, he didn't try to stamp his individual artistic vision on it.
You know, most of that tape we did actually wound up on the Incesticide record in its original form. I never had a chance to remix it. Of course, it says produced by Jack and Dino on it, so, you know, what it doesn't say is produced in about 3 hours. But whatever, it sounds okay, I suppose.
Once in a while, once in a while, once in a while.
Nirvana have always had a potted history with drummers, with Kurt and Chris always striving for sonic perfection and often venting their fury at any performer not giving 100%. This was exacerbated by Kurt's own experience playing the drums for so long. Dale Crover soon had to return to the Melvins, but recommended a local Aberdeen drummer, Dave Foster, as a replacement. After a problematic start, however, Kurt decided Dave was not up to the job and fired him, leaving the band once again drummerless. Meanwhile, Jack Endino had started passing the band's demo tapes around influential movers of the Seattle rock scene. Jonathan Poneman of Seattle indie label Sub Pop was impressed enough to add Nirvana to the bill of their next Sub Pop Sunday showcase concert at Seattle's tiny Vogue Club. In June 1988, Kurt and Chris returned to Reciprocal Studios with new drummer Chad Channing to cut their debut single, Love Buzz.
Chad Channing, who was the drummer that was the longest drummer other than Dave Grohl, was this little tiny short guy. You know, I mean, I had some people describe him almost as an elf when I was working on my book. And so the combination of him and Kurt, both these really short guys with really long hair, it was a freak show. It was a circus seeing this band. You had two really short guys with long hair, and you had this gigantic, you know, ogre of a guy almost that was taller than you could imagine. So they had quite a visual element, and the sound that they created was not really what you expected they would create from their looks.
However, they still didn't have a contract, any money, or indeed a fan base beyond a few kids in Olympia who were gradually catching on to this increasingly intense young band. They could tell something big was definitely stirring. Like most people, producer Steve Fisk's first impressions were not that great.
Yeah, the first time I saw them, I walked out on them. I thought they were terrible. But yeah, they were trying to work the extra guitar player into the band and having a bad evening, and I was so up to here with all my friends screaming trees and everything. You've got to see this band. They're playing, and they played in Ellensburg, the small town I was saying. They played at the community center, and they just had a bad night. They weren't jerks. They just really sucked, and the PA was terrible and was hurting my ears. And I said, you know, I think I'm 33 years old and I'm going to go work on my own music right now instead of watch these guys suffer through a bad set, you know, just to say I saw Nirvana.
But Steve soon realised he'd seen the band on a bad day and was recommended to check them out again by enthusiastic fans and Jonathan Poneman from Sub Pop.
And Jonathan at Sub Pop thought it would be nice for me to work with Nirvana, you know, sort of after they did their Bleach record. Been a Son was probably where most of the work went, and they were working on harmonies and trying to kind of maybe make that into kind of like a bigger sound, you know. We had a digital reverb that was sort of the trendy thing for the time period, so I was showing them how to make the snare drum do the big kind of Born in the USA thing or something.
Well, I think when Kurt began to write about himself and his family, another song from that era, which Steve Fisk produced, was Been a Son, you know, a song, I think, about his sister who in her gender struggles for identity. When he began to turn to his own turf, I think he really became a more powerful songwriter.
Competition was really tough, with a lot of young bands fighting for supremacy. In those challenging early days, Nirvana performed better in the studio than live.
On the scene, their reputation at first was not distinguished in performance. They were not good performers until a couple of years after, at least a couple of years after they began. Then they got good towards the end, but they were not distinguished performers. Their first performance at the Vogue, for instance, which was attended by a very few distinguished Seattle scenesters, was not auspicious. It was on record that they were impressive, and particularly Cobain's songwriting gift was absolutely distinctive. It was astounding. I had listened to a number of records cut in Seattle, and nobody could match him. It was a one-man phenomenon, really, at the start. The Seattle scene was Kurt Cobain.
After only 30 hours in the studio, Nirvana had finally managed to record enough material to release their first album. Taken from the Bleach Your Works AIDS prevention poster, Bleach was released by Sub Pop in June '89, with little ceremony and zero marketing spend. Nirvana found themselves on a series of ill-promoted West Coast tours with other Sub Pop stablemates Mudhoney and Tad, playing to tiny crowds, sleeping on cold floors and virtually begging for food.
Kurt didn't like the fact that Sub Pop, at the time Mudhoney was Sub Pop's main project. That was who they hyped to the ends of the earth. And he didn't like that I mean, it's weird to even say it now because Mudhoney, a lot of people don't even know who Mudhoney is. But at the time, Mudhoney, I remember Kurt was the opening act on the Lame Fest at the Moore Theater, and Tad and Mudhoney were up above him. He didn't like that.
Unsurprisingly, the album bombed. But salvation came from an unexpected corner. Sub Pop paid for a few British music journalists to fly over and witness the tour. Excited by what they had discovered, a new musical next big thing buzz appeared in the UK music press, ceremoniously labelled the Seattle grunge scene.
They flew over, who was that guy from Melody Maker from England? Everett True, I think his name was, or something like that. He did a lot of hype in England. So in Britain, all these Sub Pop bands were supposedly huge, Mudhoney and Nirvana and things like that. And so it kind of, word of mouth kind of spread back to here, and it made them bigger and bigger. And then they were actually talking about, yeah, Kurt's going to sign with Geffen.
In truth, Nirvana were always a lot more pop than their sub-pop hard punk colleagues, but were happy for any exposure, and Julie went along with all the hype.
In some ways, Nirvana was actually one of the most unlikely bands to make it big, partially because they came from Aberdeen, they weren't as tied into the Seattle music scene, and partially because by the music that they did, it was a little bit different than some of the other bands. They weren't quite as punk always. They had more pop elements. But of course, that's what made them go huge, because once you mix that pop element in and you can get ballads that can be on the radio, like Come As You Are, you suddenly have an album that's really a juggernaut.
Once in a while, once in a while, once in a while.
Nirvana continued to tour throughout 1990, which saw the departure of drummer Chad Channing. As the band was developing its powerful sound, Kurt became dissatisfied with Chad's style and commitment. They wanted a far more powerful drum approach. Buzz Osborne of the Melvins introduced Chris and Kurt to a 21-year-old drummer from Virginia, Dave Grohl. From his first audition, Grohl fitted in immediately, hitting the drums with such ferocity that he would virtually break drum skins whenever he played. This was more like it. The jigsaw and the final Nirvana lineup was now in place, and history was about to be made.
They were never really great until Dave Grohl joined the band, because he was an incredibly strong drummer, very loud, and he could sing harmony beautifully. He was a songwriter in his own right. And the other thing to remember is that Kurt Cobain was a very delicate person. His mental health was always on the edge, and he was kept creative by the efforts of his much more rooted friends who solved the everyday problems that would have overwhelmed him. I mean, washing his socks was something he couldn't handle. And when he was rooming with Dave Grohl, Grohl handled it because, as one of his friends said, Dave was raised in a van by wolves. And so he could cope with life on the road and life in a band in a way that Cobain could not.
I think by the time Dave Grohl joined the band in '90, the dynamics within the band began to shift a bit. Cobain became much more of a front man. People wanted him to be the front man. Interviewers weren't as interested in talking to the other band members. It became more the Kurt show. And I think it had run more as a democracy prior to that. Part of that was just with success. With success, people demanded much more out of Kurt.
When Dave Grohl joined the band, things worked more smoothly, partly because Kurt didn't have to anymore throw himself in rage against the drum kit because he was no longer so dissatisfied with what the drum kit was putting out. In concert, he famously used to interrupt the show by smashing his guitar and then smashing up the drum set. And it was because he was so angry at the fact that the song that he had in his head was being ruined by a drummer that wasn't up to snuff as he saw it. When Dave Grohl joined the band, the drummer most certainly was up to snuff.
These were exciting times for Nirvana, and Dave Grohl found himself touring England with the band literally weeks after joining them.
My sense is that many people perceive both Novoselic and Grohl as fun-loving, goofy guys, because